Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to see you all, dear friends, and welcome to the first inspiring memory session of the European Days of Jewish Culture 2023. As you know, the European Days of Jewish Culture is a festival celebrated every year in more than 30 countries across all Europe, aimed at promoting and sharing the Jewish cultural heritage with all of the society. The theme for this year's festival is memory, as you know. Collective or individual through history or narrative. Memory is the pot in which Judaism was forged. It is through memory that Judaism is maintained and transmitted. But we would like to invite you to deal with the theme of memory from a myriad of different perspectives, from the most traditional to the most avant-garde. To this end, it is that we have organized this cycle of 4 inspiring memory sessions, through which experts in the field of memory and Jewish culture will present novel means of approaching memory in order to inspire us when organizing activities in the context of the upcoming European Days of Jewish Culture Festival. Before we begin, I'd like to remind the organizers and activity coordinators that we have some resources available on our website to help you plan your activities, including the editable poster and the graphic identity of this year's festival, as well as materials for training and learning about memory with a wide and diverse perspective. On another hand, the practical information kit containing all the guidelines for organizing an activity for the European Days is now ready. It will be sent through the exclusive newsletter for organizers and coordinators between this afternoon and tomorrow. The kit includes all the necessary information to plan and execute a successful event, from its conceptualization to post-event evaluation. It is an essential tool for those who want to participate in this cultural celebration and make a meaningful contribution to the preservation and dissemination of Jewish culture in Europe. I also want to announce you that we have the second Inspiring Memory session scheduled for May 31st in the afternoon. Pau Garcia from Domestic Data Streamers will present a talk called Rebuilding Synthetic Past with Artificial Intelligence. In this talk, we will explore the potential use of generative artificial intelligence in reconstructing memories in various communities worldwide, and the implications this technology could have in our relationship with our visual and virtual heritage. You can already register for the second Inspiring Memory session in our website. You will find a link, and also in the newsletter. Without any further ado, I would like now to give the floor to APJ Director Victor Sorensen to introduce the speaker of this first Inspiring Memory session with Luca Baraldi. Victor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fede. I have the big honor of introducing our speaker today, Luca Baraldi. Also a good friend, I will say. Luca is a semiotician and historian of religion who has been working in the field of cultural diplomacy and policies for over 15 years. He has developed dozens of projects on cultural heritage tourism and community-based cultural development, appointed Professor of Religious Heritage Studies and History of Religions by the Pontifical Marian Congregation. He has served as scientific director at the Vicenza campus of the Pontifical Theology Faculty Marianum from 2012 to 2016. Luca is also the co-founder and vice president for the Italian Alliance for Israel, and he has co-authored and edited many articles and books on Jewish history and Jewish culture in Europe. As a board member for many international think tanks and foundations, He is the head of corporate identity and public relations at Amagamma, an Italian data science company. Luca has collaborated with the APJ on different occasions as an expert in our training programs, both in the incubators on the European Route of Jewish Heritage and also in the Midorredor program in Italy. Today, Luca will be presenting a conference titled From Social Storytelling to Social Sense-Making, Digitized Memory and Collective Imagery, a fascinating topic that I'm sure will spark interesting conversations and insights. So please take a pen or your notebook because Luca's ideas are always a source of inspiration. Luca, thank you very much for being with us today. And please join me in giving a warm welcome to Luca Baraldi. Luca, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Federico. Thank you for the organization of this event. And first of all, thank you all the persons who decided to attend and to face a little bit this challenging topic. Today we'll try to share with you through many themes, perhaps many provocations, a reflection on memory, its role and its ability to create meaning. I will do so starting from some elements of cultural sensitivity of the Jewish tradition, but I will try to maintain an open perspective on a multicultural horizon in a perspective of cultural pluralism and social interdependence. And I will start precisely by clarifying the terms. When I speak of multicultural horizon, I'm speaking of the need to integrate in a condition of real mutual respect the different secular cultural systems and religious systems, united by the choice to respect and value what we consider here in Europe to be fundamental rights. On the other hand, when I speak of social interdependence, I try to make evident the need today more than ever to use culture as a system for reactivating awareness of the need for shared existence. In the age of digitization, we will see it in the age of the dematerialization of experience. We need to keep alive the conception of our role, of our purpose in the world. We need to keep ourselves alive. And I wish I could start from the assumption that human beings have the clarity and the foresight to understand what is really important, but all of us know very well that the history of humanity goes in a different direction. Somehow, perhaps deluded by the potential of technology, we lose sight of the individual's responsibility and the potential for individual freedom. We have to decide today, we have the ability to decide who we are and who we want to be, who we want to exist for, and with what purpose and with what vision. We need to decide how in this pluralistic context, in this interdependent society, how we want to preserve our memory, how we want to animate our present, and how we want to envision our future. And on this tiny thread of time, on this fragility of existence, we will base our reflection, starting with a verse from a poem by Israel Pinkas. He wrote in a poem many years ago, one way to understand something about us, talking about human beings, is perhaps to say that we pass. Okay, let's start from this point. One way to understand something about us is perhaps to say that we pass. I will try to spell out some steps simply by saying the number. I know it's complex reasoning. I know that I will share seemingly contradictory ideas with you, but I ask you for the patience to try to follow me. Each step will try to add an element to the reflection. Each step somehow complicates things, but I hope it provides at the same time some elements to interpret them in a more open way. The first step. Today, we live in a digital reality. Somebody used to define it hybrid reality. Somebody else talks about dematerialization of reality. Somebody else defines our historical time as the so-called access era. Digital technologies, which had already undergone a very strong acceleration in the 90s, especially with the expansion of the web, have experienced a real phase of radical acceleration in the context of the pandemic. The need for connection, for fast communication, for digital transformation of physical habits and experiences has led to an almost total digitization of life. It applies to, for example, to reading habits. It applies to the habits of listening to music, to shopping, to buying books, to buying clothes. We have moved our life experience and even our market experience into an intangible dimension. Even after COVID, it's difficult to get people used, for example, to rediscovering the pleasure of going to the cinema, rather than locking themselves up in the domestic space to watch a film on streaming platforms. What we see is not only as the experience being digitized for a substitute dimension of what was not possible to do for safety measures in the pandemic, but the expectation towards the experience has been digitized. Somehow, our way of feeling has given way to the virtualization of the senses. We agreed to transform all of reality into a world that can be totally datified. As we know, as you know, today we are increasingly accustomed to hearing about data-driven decision-making processes, data-driven companies, data-driven marketing strategies, data-driven governance. Even the World Health Organization itself has tried, since the first symptoms of the pandemic, to manage everything starting from the large availability of data, trying in some way to bring the complexity to numerical sequences. After 2 years of more or less unsuccessful, certainly perfectible attempts, even the WHO has recognized the need to create a department of behavioral and cultural insights. After trying to bring everything back to a series of numbers, it was recognized that the number is nothing more than the superficial symptom of a changing, elusive complexity. But if we claim to be able to translate everything into numbers, and at the same time we recognize the digital untranslatability of all the experience of existence, what role does our identity play? Are we really attributable to intersections between clusters, to mixtures of categories? Are we really simply a sum of tags? As individuals and as a society, we have the possibility, perhaps I would say the moral duty, to ask ourselves if we are really willing to let our complexity, our depth, our uniqueness be flattened on systems of categorization of human beings based, in fact, on Excel tables. Are we really that simple? Are we really that poor? We could try to contextualize the complexity I'm talking about on at least 2 different dimensions, the simplest, the most linear, space and time. With respect to space, it is evident from the first glance that Jewish history, a physiologically intangible history without physical roots, without territories, is linked to the idea of dematerialization. There is nothing as stable and as persistent as the intangible world of words beyond Jewish history. The only real point of reference, if we want to force the metaphor a little, is the code. There is nothing but language in its forms, in its interpretations, in its traditions. The complexity of Jewish cultural and religious history has always been linked to the codes, to the language. With respect to time, the great epistemological and interpretative challenge of the coherence, the consistency, and the legitimacy of the transmission of information is raised. If the history of a people is an intangible one, all that matters is the ability to give stability to intangible roots. There is no traditional geopolitics. There is no administrative law to guarantee stability. There is only memory, with its lights and shadow, with its search for a consistent thread, in an attempt not to feel totally at the mercy of the waves of history. This absence of materiality is a key point to which we will return. The second step about the use of words and about the different uses of language. Traditionally, in the Western world, in our, I would call Eurocentric culture, we have gradually become accustomed to the idea of a word that is a tool of transmission, perhaps more rarely a tool of creativity. Words convey notions, words convey information, but they should have an order. The theories of information, the theories of semiotics, the history of language has accustomed us to considering language as a tool to be managed in a more or less linear way. We have progressively linked the value of language to a conception of its functionality, its effectiveness, its usability. We have made language a brush instead of a color palette. In the words of the datification of reality, and certainly of the datification of information, we have accepted the habit of considering language, every single word, like a tag, like a flat, static, linear label. We have progressively lost the ability to transform semantic imprecision into an unexpected horizon and to recognize possible interpretations as the claim for an ontological freedom. By reducing language to a code, therefore linked to a linear function, we have somehow denied the creative capacity of Adam. In the Garden of Eden, in the Garden of Eden, Adam does not give names, in the Garden of Eden, Adam does not give names to stabilize the nature of things, but on the contrary, to extract them from the void of the absence of the chance of the absence of names, of the absence of meaning. What cannot be called by name cannot have the chance to evolve with its nature. In a world where everything can be codified, care must be taken not to transform language into a procedure. We need to rediscover the teaching of Babel, of disorder as a necessity, to rediscover order as freedom rather than as a constraint. Language is not informative, it is not descriptive, but it is so much more. It can generate, it can enliven, it can transform, it can confuse, it can redefine. The word allows a reality to change shape, to change destiny, to change horizon. Today, I speak of word because it is the simplest register to understand in the transformation into digital code. In fact, language is a code understood as a conventional sequence of symbols according to a limited and perimeterable matrix in a consistent, precise, and defined way. But it could be true for the use of images or sounds. In fact, it could be true for everything that is transformed through translation interfaces into a system with the rigid, interconnected, limited, precise categories. But it is in ambiguity that creation comes to life. It is in the imprecision that meaning expresses its own possibilities of existence, which claims the freedom to be other. And in this otherness, it expresses the possibility of getting out of the predefined schemes of the categories of its marked destiny. We need a narration that can free the imprecise meaning of words, and that allows our logic to escape from the idea of pre-traced schemes. On the one hand, the social imagery defines a vocabulary for anthropological or social categories, for example, the Italian, the Colombian, the Jew, and attributes characteristics to these categories. On the other hand, liberation, which etymologically we should define as redemption, must allow, precisely starting from language, from the symbolic system, to subvert an order established a priori, fixed with degrees of language, behind the bars of words. You have to take care of the openness of language. We have to take care of the openness of language. We need to overcome the traditional conception of language, no longer purely descriptive, no longer purely informative, but the rediscovery of its greater function, language for new inspiration, for new creation, for new regeneration of words. The third step about the individual and the need for a new social contract. We talked about the end of materiality and the difficulties that this entails. We have spoken of language as a system of organizing order and in some ways of order as a convention. In the digitized world, in the deified world, immateriality determines a loss of information. Coding, through the procedural language, determines a necessary approximation. On the one hand, the loss of senses, on the other, the loss of expressive capacity. Yet we live in an era of great potential, perhaps the first in history in which we have everything we need to solve the world's problems. From a certain point of view, we would have all the technical and technological levers to ensure that the utopistic thought of the Tikkun Olam could be accelerated in the operational integration between what the mind wants and what the hand can do. But once again, as often happens in human history, the ability to recognize true need is lacking, the ability to accept priority is lacking, and the will to reach or to work for the common good is lacking. Once again, the individual prevails over the prospect of sharing the destiny. Not only is the forbidden fruit picked up, but it is picked and thrown away without even being tasted. The individual, in the absence of comparison, of dialectical exchange, in the absence of willingness to compare, finds himself emptied of predictive capacity, deprived of his ability to understand the world. In a world founded, as we have said, on the digitization of information and the automation of knowledge, individualism entails the loss of the fullness of life. The information retrieval systems, as well as those for content production that we have available today, are based on the information that is on the web and on existing data. In some way, it is as if technology were accelerating an ever more closed, ever more one-dimensional self-referentiality with respect to the unexpressed scenario of possible words. In information theories, we speak of echo chamber, of echo effects, which amplifies information bubbles in which we find ourselves cradled and slowly trapped in self-subsistence microcosms, in which pluralism does not exist, in which alternative truths do not exist, in which our mind gets used to neglecting everything that, through the filter of the digital world, simply doesn't find space, or doesn't want to find it. Let's think about it. Even if we are aware of the limits of technology, if we have to entrust someone with a simple assignment, even if it were to repair the washing machine, we are suspicious of who doesn't exist on the web, of who don't even have a page on social media. We are fueling a paradox whereby the system that was supposed to make available the representation of a reality has replaced reality itself, at least in our perception. We only recognize what becomes recognizable through an interface of logical organization of existence. What does not exist in the immaterial reality of the web simply does not exist. The society we are moving towards will amplify this tendency to the extreme limits of cognitive danger. The new generations have become unaccustomed to the rigor of the reconstruction of the past, of the chain of transmission of the past, simply because society has accustomed them to the instantaneousness of existence. Instagram, which is called Instagram, speaks of the instant, not of the flow of the story. We could certainly say that the sequence of instants makes up the story, but what changes, what must be taken into consideration, is the perspective with respect to the choice to publish in the instant, with what purpose, with what will, with what perspective. We are used to knowing that history is written by the victors, with informative selections and conscious removals that compose a voluntary representation of memory. Here, this is the theme. Social history, built from the aggregation of information on millions of individual stories, is becoming today more than ever the product of millions of stories written by those who want to feel like winners. If traditionally historiography, the writing of history, is the product of an artificial operation, which however had to deal with critical analysis, with dissident thoughts, but above all with the physical evidence of what was happening, today in the era of the dematerialization of existence, two existential dangers seem to shake hands. The first danger, on the one hand, the artificial construction of history starting from the desire for self-representation. On the other, the indemonstrability of history in its physical connotation, which today, in the new categories of what exists, we can no longer define as real. Somehow, relativism fueled by the desire for consensus, by the need for public consensus, is prevailing. What happens seems somehow insane, but it should not be underestimated. Today, in the virtual representation of the life I live, I choose to represent myself and therefore to exist, according to the traffic I will be able to generate. Today, what obtains the most public consensus has more ontological solidity and legitimacy. And I would like to focus attention on this issue, trying to reflect on 2 points. The first, memory becomes the product of an artificial operation of information aggregation and no longer an experiential operation. What is represented remains in the way it is represented, in the condition of giving everyone the possibility of manipulating their own representation. Collective memory fails because there is no correlation between individual memory and individual life, between what has been lived and what has been told. Each published selfie is a selection from dozens of selfies, from dozens of filters. We have become the staging of our lives. And the memory that will remain of us will be that seemingly harmless performance that we repeat every day, in the seemingly harmless act of selecting that fragment of reality that seems most interesting to us, and of telling it in the way that seems more attractive to us for the audience we want to reach. The second danger, language, flattened to a descriptive dimension, a sequence of procedures and instructions, is getting us used to an unprecedented cognitive and behavioral transformation. In the global audience of content producers, in the visibility of the lives of millions of people, we are not called to listen, but to enjoy. We are not called to understand, but to follow. We are not called to identify ourselves, but to imitate. We live inundated with millions of possible life stories, but we become passive users of people's existence. On the one hand, we can draw inspiration from it, we can raise questions, we can discover new paths. On the other hand, the dialectical possibility is lost in a predefined code of rigid reactions. The emotionality of the reaction is traced back to a scale of emoticons, which force us to imagine a precise range of sensations. In losing the ability to interact, we lose the ability to let others interact. There are biochemical mechanisms in the reaction to one of our posts, and there are algorithmic mechanisms in the visibility of our contents. As the philosopher Pascal Chabot says, it is the techniques that forms the modes of existence and translate ideas into reality. The techniques before everything else. In this dimension, what are the new memory production processes? What role do we play in trying to save a way of making history less fragile, a little less manipulable, a little less forgettable. As paradoxical as it may seem, perhaps the only way to come back to the uncertainty of the hyper-descriptiveness of social communication is simply to tell slow stories without too many words. We have to get used to going out of the stage window again to understand that behind the self-representative need of the capillary history of the existence of all of us, there is a great history, which has defined the perimeter of our rights, of our freedoms, of our very possibility to manipulate with a little vanity the way we want others to perceive us. There is a story behind our stories. And if our stories are largely made up of beats and a desire for attention, and the history behind us, real history, human history, planetary history, there are big questions, great achievements, great pains. And the paradox is the tension between the possibility of absolute knowledge, of absolute information, and the inability to understand that behind the information there is another reality. By now accustomed to the gap between what exists and what is told, we see, for example, war reports and find it hard to understand that it is not a movie. Reality always seems to us a representation until it enters, usually with an unwanted vehemence, into our lives. We are accustomed to dehumanized human history, convinced that everything is or can be mediated by filters. We don't question the nature of others because we believe that, after all, each person interposes a series of narrative reworkings between their own life and the way they represent it. Irene Vallejo, a Spanish writer, in an article written a few years ago, published in a book called El Futuro Recordado, speaks of literature as the opening of existential horizons and affirms that in a narcissistic and egomaniacal world, the best that can happen to one is to be able to become potentially everyone else. We need to relearn to notice what is happening around us, outside the representable dimension of our existence. We have to start losing control of our narrative again. If there is only what we choose to keep in the publishability of content, the digitized world will bend the importance of the different phases of our existence to a logic of data traffic. And here I want to add an even more delicate element. Once in the silence of our personal diaries, there was no mediator between us and the possible recipients to whom we decided to speak. Whether they were imaginary or real recipients, we wrote for ourselves. Today, our digital diaries are designed to be told publicly, in the place, in the square, and are mediated by private platforms. The purpose of the platforms, it is useless to deny the evidence, is to make a profit on the data traffic generated by our information. The algorithms underlying the distribution of information, the flows of information, the way in which one of our posts is viewed, promoted, or neglected, are designed to generate traffic and not to recognize the value of what we say. The value of our words, of our stories, of our memories is measured only on the basis of the traffic it can generate. And on the basis of this same traffic, it is conserved, recovered, put back into circulation. Our intangible history exists only if it is seen, if it is read, and above all, if it generates a reaction. We exist only as a function of what we arouse. In these mechanisms of causality of existence, what values does memory play? Are we sure that we will be able to preserve historical memory if we tell a memory that is too uncomfortable to be consumed? If information, even historical information, even important information, becomes entertainment, how will it change? How should our way of remembering change? How will the aesthetics of memory change? Should we ask ourselves how to make memory palatable to ensure it has a place in the future of preserved information? Or should we ensure that it is true memory? Should we deal with the design of memory to bring the transmission of historical data as close as possible to the logic of consumable content? Should we ask ourselves how to make our memory competitive in order to attract attention in the right way? Will we have to think about lead generation, as is done in the market logic, also to convey the history of which we are heirs? For now, we will leave the question unanswered, but we will return to this point again at the end of our reflection. The fourth point about storytelling and the different processes of sense making. Many years ago, almost 20 years ago, when I started researching Jewish history and culture, I was surprised by many topics which literally enraptured me. I dealt with medieval manuscripts, with the linguistic evolution, with many researches on Judeo-Italian, with the contamination between Christianity and Judaism, especially in the Middle Ages and in the pre-modern age, with Kabbalah, with cultural heritage. Gradually, I realized that the only real common thread, the only real common fil rouge that characterized my work, my desire to understand the Jewish world, was linked to semiotics. When I was involved in history of Kabbalah with the years of research on the manuscripts by Mordechai ben Yehuda Dato, who was a disciple of Moshe Cordovero, I was interested in his attempt to make cryptic concepts of Kabbalah accessible through images and metaphors. When I dealt with Jewish preaching, I tried to understand how preachers created methodologies for the emotional engagement of the assembly without being able, without the possibility to use the emotional impact of the images of painting. When I dealt with Judeo-Italian, I tried to discover how the processes of assimilation and interaction had modified and profoundly enriched cultural and religious systems that coexisted in the same territory, even by modifying the local dialects. When I dealt with the Jewish social history and the history of anti-Judaism and then of anti-Semitism, I deepened the construction of narrative processes, the construction of models for defining identities and the dynamics of relationships between memory models. Everything has always led me to analyze the narrative dimension of Judaism. In Judaism, everything is memory, everything is word, everything is transmission. For many centuries, we can say that there was no distraction of the accumulation of power, or the dispersion of energy, of the conquest of territories, even if the work of Esther Ben Bassam, La souffrance comme identité, which has been translated as suffering as identity, defines an important threshold of critical analysis of Jewish self-perception through the centuries, at least in certain contexts. But it is important to understand how a particular story has allowed to concentrate energies and dedication to research and discovery of knowledge. A complex knowledge composed of explorations in external linguistic words with respect to the monolithism of the Eurocentric matrix, but opening up to the Mediterranean, to the Middle East, to the influences of the mysteries and mystics of other continents. Like any complex knowledge, it needed new descriptive models, sometimes new words, a new taxonomy, new ontological perspectives, even before conceptual ones. Jewish history is a semantic history. One of the things that has always surprised me for the most is the hybrid nature of Talmudic composition, of Talmudic text. Halacha and Agadah, rule and narrative, rigor and openness, precision and ambiguity. The conception of law in the Jewish tradition provides precise instructions for regulating behavior and at the same time guarantees the interpretability through examples, emotions, the humanization of the norm. On the other hand, there is the codified, on the one hand, there is the codified information. On the other, there is the recognition and the acceptance of the fluidity of existence. As Zygmunt Bauman rightly said, we live today in a liquid society in which categories have lost their meaning and stability. Yet in the technological acceleration, without realizing it, we are delivering the liquid nature of society to the rigidity of codified mathematical models. We need to learn to keep a balance. We need to relearn to read Talmud as a source of inspiration. On the one hand, the law, the existential fluidity regulated through a conventional code. And on the other hand, the story, the claim of the existential fluidity as a necessary condition, even going against the rules, even breaking the mold. In some way, the law has always been the image of the ideal society, at least from the point of view of those who govern. When we study in retrospect a society through law, we must always remember this. Law describes what the society of an era thought was right. Law described the desired perfection. Somehow the law arises, obviously in the filter coding of power, like the description of a society's selfie. Among the many possible options, the many possible versions, the choice of the best version with the application of the best filter. It is as if in codifying a regulatory code, a king or a government or a legislator looked at their work as a projection of the society they want. It's as if they were saying, we did well in this one, let's post it. Law is the projection of memory that we would like posterity to receive. If the law somehow focuses on the narration of the past, art instead becomes an exploratory language in the reality of the present. Try to experiment, to touch with your eyes closed, to probe the ground, to understand what is happening, to look for keys to understanding. Art allows us to go beyond the limits of the code, beyond the limits of the limitation of the language, to reshuffle the senses and to seek a new meaning. Art allows us to go beyond the linear correspondence between signifier and signified. It allows us to break down the barriers of logic. Art subverts the rules of gravity, of aesthetics, of realism. It allows us to tell what happened and what could have happened. It allows us to conserve together the entire differentiation, the entire different versions of the many possible presents. Again, as with information, art is undergoing a transformation in social perception. Less and less a cognitive access tool, more and more an occasion for entertainment. Normally, we have to admit it, we do not choose to go to an exhibition to question our epistemological perspectives, but to spend our free time instead. We don't go to an exhibition to see how someone else looked at the world, but to see the evolution of a style. Of course, it doesn't apply to everyone, but it is important to be honest when we try to analyze the evolving cultural context in which we live in. Regarding us, regarding the need to try to apply different epistemological filters, I think it is very important, especially in the context of Jewish culture, to take the time regarding the reframing of memory, to rediscover the voice of Abraham Warburg, the historian of arts, to discover an inevitably Jewish perspective on the iconographic evolution of word art. And on the other hand, I think it is important, it should be important to try to rediscover Bruno Zevi's reflection on architecture and urban planning, who in his Judaism and Architecture states that tomorrow is built in the present. This prompts us to question ourselves about the future by hypothesizing its projects. What can this lead to tomorrow? The active incisive, pounding contribution of Jewish thought is necessary and urgent for humanity today. Out of the quote. The contribution of Jewish culture to the interpretation and counter-interpretation of the linearity of artistic history is fundamental precisely because it starts from a perspective external to European epistemological homogeneity. We need to understand and to make people understand that the construction of memory feeds on the evolution of symbolic languages, that the history of art is above all a history of dialectical tension and contamination, that the narrative of an era is constructing starting from a visual imagery, for a very simple reason. We're sensitive beings before being rational beings. We believed, we convinced ourselves that rationality should be purified by the strong presence of tangible reality, yet it is the smells that bring back memories more than anything else. These are the flavors that take us back to our childhood, to what our grandmother cooked, to the precise flavors, only those connected to moments of, for example, festivity with our families. It is the senses that help us make sense of things. And here we come to the closure of our circle, of our conceptual path, to the point of arrival of our journey. We talked about the dematerialization of reality and about the way we have become accustomed to considering virtualization as a space of advantage. We talked about coding and about language as a system for stiffening the complexity of reality. We talked about the technological systems that automate information flows and that compose in a mechanical way, based on numbers, what deserves to be remembered. We talked about the way in which languages evolve, the way in which the law can order but also liberate, the way in which art allows us to preserve sensoriality. We talked about the need to keep all these levels together, material, sensory, digital, intangible, and to question ourselves critically about our nature and what we want our nature to be, about how we want the memory of our nature to be. And here we collide with reality. Here the problems begin. In this context, on this occasion, we share themes, reflections, conceptual elaborations, but outside the door, outside this screen, there is a reality that is showing all its edges, a reality that is showing its fragility. Out of here, we have to deal with the strategies behind the manipulation of information, with the information warfare dynamics that will make our ability to distinguish what is plausible, what is credible, from what is increasingly fragile, from what is true. Out of here, we have to figure out how to redefine a security perimeter for a memory that today more than ever risks being swept away by a lifestyle focused on a permanent present, on a so-called Insta life, as we have seen before. Out of here, we have to understand that we can't help but wonder about the political key to our work. Hannah Arendt, in 1955, in her speech on the occasion of the awarding of the Lessing Prize, stated that history knows many periods in which the public space darkens and the world becomes so uncertain that people no longer ask politics except to lend attention to their vital interests and their private liberty. The European project that has fueled the political imagination from the second half of the 20th century to today is based on an overcoming fear, on the desire to overcome the fear of every person of not seeing their vital interests respected. It is a project that from the outset was based on the desire to elaborate joint responses to the threat, different from time to time, that characterize the evolution of history. Geopolitics has had to progressively abandon the scenarios of the forecasting strategy in favor of a more fluid, more elusive emergency management scenarios. Over the past few years, political scientists and journalists have fed kilometers of printed pages, questioning which dynamics of the past had generated this present, which mechanisms of international political reflection had created over the years this idea of democracy, this idea of a country, this idea of European memory. However, I believe that we can no longer disregard a serious reflection based on correct political premises and adequate intellectual tools on the role of cultures, traditions, memories, the innumerable potential of a Europe which is still struggling to reformulate its imagination, respecting of the value of a complex, sometimes certainly controversial, but undeniably extraordinary past. Anne-Cécile Robert states, rightly in my opinion, that the function of history is not to heal the wounds of the present. Certainly, however, it will not be possible to trace a direction on the future of a project as ambition as it is necessary, such as the European one, the multicultural European one, without an accurate analysis of what has characterized the multi-millennial history of a dynamic and multiform geopolitical ecosystem. The task of all of us, as professionals, as scholars, as diplomats, but above all as citizens, is to give voice to the questions without fear and shame, so that together we can try to nurture the courage and foresight to seek new answers. The task of all of us is to convert memory into a transformation driver. The task of all of us, with every little action in the greatness of everyday life, is to try to help give the future of a dream a new chance and to give memory a new future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luca. That was, I think, very interesting, very provocative. Also, I think very up to date with what is happening right now. Here we have a very nice forum of people that are cultural and heritage practitioners, and I'm sure that many of the things that you were presenting are very related with our daily challenges, no, and our thoughts during our days at work, but also at night. No, there's a bit of a philosophical perspective on these kinds of issues. Before giving the floor to our colleagues here in the room, I would like to start by asking you a question, just to break the ice in that sense. And I was thinking while you were presenting, how do you think that this technological presence, and I'm thinking now in tools that are very trendy right now, like GPT chat, affect the work of memory in our societies, no? And if we only recognize what exists in the interface and in the digital medium, here what we can create a gap or a risk of political or manipulation, it's really clear. But do you think that it also can turn into an opportunity? That will be a first question, and related also with this one, why we cannot see like more reflection in the field of culture and heritage, not only on the limits, but also on the ethical conception and the effect on the use of technology in our fields. Thank you, Luca.
Okay, it's an easy one. No, well, technology is a tool that can offer today enormous potential. As you told, I am now the head of a unit working in the field of applied social sciences in an artificial intelligence company in Italy, and we're trying to work in order to lay the foundations for a critical methodologies to analyze, to try to understand which could be the potential impacts at both cultural and social level of such technologies. But it is important to understand that for the first time, we're talking about, you mentioned ChatGPT. For the first time, we're talking about a technology that has a direct cognitive impact, which can radically accelerate the possibility of producing knowledge. The big question is, whether we are ready to manage to handle such a big amount of knowledge, such a quick possibility for producing information, for identifying correlations within the everlastingly changing scenario of today world complexity. Are we aware of what are the risks of knowing better or knowing more, and what we'll be able to do with all this knowledge? I mentioned the example of Adam, and I really think that today we are facing the risk of picking up the fruit without tasting it, because we are somehow stoned by this need for accelerating every day more, trying to accept that we are living in a dimension of permanent competition with all the other actors and stakeholders around the world. I think we have not still understood that we need to slow down and to give ourselves the time to manage all this flowing, changing technology, which is going to generate a deep impact in our way of our understanding ourselves, in our way of questioning reality, in our way of envisioning our possible future. It can be a really important tool, a great potential, enormous potential, but I'm afraid, basically because of the human nature, and I think we have not understood yet which can be the impact and how to use such an amount of knowledge.
Thank you, Luca. I'm going to open the floor. I also have the temptation of just throwing more questions to Luca, but I think that it's fair. So please just raise your hand or unmute your microphone and take advantage of Luca. I was reading in the chat text of a comment of Neus that she will need a bit more of time, but I don't know if Federico, if you can see anyone from the.
Yeah, just to I've just read the message in the chat. I will share the text of the presentation with all the references and some suggestions for more readings and more tools to work on.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, for sure. I think it was really interesting. I was trying to take a look to the architect that you were referring, unknown for me, and I'm asking myself, no, why that can happen, no, if such a impressive work. Just looking at some reference in internet.
Maybe if there are no questions, I can jump in with one of those for Luca, and also opening it to the whole public here, and following with the idea of what happens with all these new generative artificial intelligences, which I am very interested in. Next, in a couple of weeks, we will have, as I explained at the first moment, a presentation by Pau Garcia, in which he will talk about how these intelligence can be used to not to generate new memories, but to recuperate memories that maybe we have lost. Do you have any concerns on that? What happens, for example, when some pieces of memory that we may have lost, and now we are able to regenerate them? Do you have any ideas about this?
Okay, thank you, Federico. Actually, I don't know. I think that everything that can help us to recover or to even to empower our way of thinking and dealing with our memories, with our preserved or lost memories, should be more than welcome. As usual, the big problem is how to be sure that the recovered memories are not a representation or a possible representation of a possible version of reality, but it is true. And so how to be sure that these tools, these technologies are helping us to recover something lost or not, to fill the gaps depending on the information and the data with which the algorithm has been trained. And so does the AI system, the artificial intelligence, complete or fill the gap with his information, with the information it has been trained with? Or does he have all the cultural elements, the epistemological elements to help us really to complete the empty spaces in the reconstruction of our historical flow? Certainly, it can be a pivotal tool, a real driver for helping us to understand how might be important to enhance the use of imagination as a critical tool, as an epistemological tool for trying to critically approach the flows of our memory. But we have to pay attention, because an AI system can help us, but it starts from what it has been trained with. And so we just have to be careful. Right in these weeks, probably in 2 days, on the 11th of May, there will be a plenary vote in the European Parliament precisely regarding the creation of a framework for 5 different levels of risk impact of AI application. And one of these is about the manipulation of information. Well, the big problem is exactly this one. We have to be aware that there could be a representation of reality and the reality itself that are exactly overlapping, or that there are many differences, and representation is nothing but a possible interpretation of a possible version of reality. But actually, I must confess that I fall in love with the generative AI systems. What I think what we are missing is the need for rediscovering a different approach, a different epistemological and critical approach towards the use of technology.
Thank you, Luca. Maybe just last one, just to close this session. There's a very nice message from Marietka Vedrak from Slovenia. No, thanks to you, Marietka, for attending. I don't know, Muriel, there's a... Okay, so you take the turn. I already asked my question. So Muriel, please go ahead. If you want to introduce yourself, just for Luca to have a... to identify you a bit.
Especially, I have different interests, and I found everything you say. Thank you for for your speech, and it was very interesting. The role of the society coding, the dematerial society, and over the impact it has on the ways of thinking and limiting the languages and all sorts of acting in society. But somehow I feel you're a little bit pessimistic, because in a way you don't have to use all these tools, and I feel real life is totally complementary. If digitalization is very interesting for research, for comparison, for everything. Digitized books is wonderful, but there will always be a place for real books, artist books that are unique, that you touch, that are unique for materiality. It's not a copy, and there's, as you say, there's still a place for imagination, creation, and I don't think one is against the other.
I'm just taking notes. Well, thank you very much, Muriel. Actually, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm very optimistic about the potential of technology. I must confess, I'm less optimistic about human beings' ability to slow down, to accept that they have to stop for a while and to try and to understand what's happening, to understand that they must not lose their senses. And regarding this topic, I think it should be really, really important to rethink, to redefine the education strategies about the way technology and experience education should be integrated. And so it is important to understand that digital technologies are not simply the evolution of a washing machine. These are technologies which are going to have a deep impact on the way we think. Probably for the first time, with this force, this depth, we have a technology which is going to change our cognitive processes. And so it is important to rethink the way we want to conceive education and the way we want new generations to understand how to preserve the central role of senses. The only risk I see, I totally understand it. I hope that we are not going to lose the sensory importance of art production. But the only risk I see in a condition where we have not been able to rethink education is that in the future it will become somehow an elite dimension. And so it is important to work together and to promote such a committed cultural responsibility in order to support schools and communities to understand that technology is not enough, that effectiveness or performance is not the most important keystone of our lives, because there are some dimensions in our experience of knowing arts, of discovering culture, which needs materiality, which needs time, which needs slow time. And it is against the traditional conception. For example, many parents are trying to teach to their children. And so everything must be very productive, very efficient, very, very quick. Everything should be with a precise purpose, with a clear intention. But it is important to rediscover slow time, spare time, even rediscover how to get bored, for example, in a museum. it is important not to.
Creativity comes from when you're bored.
Yeah, no, it is important not to conceive museum only as a place when you can discover and you can learn. No, it is right. It's fine if you get bored because you spend 3 hours with your family or with your class. Because even if you don't want, you are going to discover that it is a space which has been conceived with a precise meaning, which is to put together different conceptions of beauty, different conceptions of aesthetics. And somehow, someday you will discover, you will go again with your girlfriend, your children, and you will have a look and will discover that through the years you have changed your way of conceiving the same beauty and the same aesthetics. Technology today can create a big distance, can create a real cognitive wall towards the needs for preserving the central epistemological importance of senses. I think we should rethink education and rethink the way we conceive technology, not only as a tool, because today this kind of technology is an agent. It has an agency, it can interact with us. There are many different generative AI systems that can write newspaper articles much more better than many journalists could do. And it is important to accept that technology is running fast, and the keystone we have to work on, we have to preserve, is about epistemology, is about what cannot be turned into a series of numbers. And so, yes, it is necessary to integrate, experience the different ways of experiencing art, the different ways of living culture, the different shapes of intangible heritage. It is important to, for example, to work to promote, to foster the conception of heritage community beyond the Faro Declaration. We have to rediscover from a different perspective, a different point of view, all the political reflections about the necessary interaction between community and heritage. That technology can no more be considered simply as a tool. It has become an agent, it has become a third actor around the table with its characteristics. And I think that probably today we have to reinvent new categories. And we have, I always insist on this, even in my activity with policymakers, we have to reinvent the way we want to conceive education itself.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. And that I also feel that it's everything is completely linked, because you can come from start with technology to bring back children to contemplation in a museum and so on, which like print was before. A simple postcard could bring an adult to go back to the essence of art or the essence of a memory. It's not always a bad thing.
No.
It can be only a part of a way of going back slow, or going back to the unique, or
yeah. I totally agree. I think it should be important also to shuffle the scientific categories. I have a background as a historian of religions, and then I've been working for many years in the field of cultural diplomacy. But I've spent the last 3 years as the head of a unit in an AI company, because we have decided to work from an epistemological point of view. And so we have worked on the evolution of language, on the evolution of the relation between language and code and conceptual conventions, and the way the architecture of knowledge can generate an impact on the way we manage data. but I apply every day my background as a historian of religions. And so I think we should go out of the traditional boxes of disciplinary, monodisciplinary effectiveness in managing projects. I think we should really mix ideas, mix conceptions, and I think that the way we are trying to reconceive the role of memory must play a central role also on the reflection of politicians about the way we manage knowledge, we manage information, we manage the legitimacy of historical data. And so it is not simply, I don't want to simplify, but it is not only a matter of cultural heritage or cultural preservation. It is a strategic theme. It is a social theme. It is a deeply political topic today. So it is a great challenge to can focus the European Day for Jewish Culture on such a challenging vision. But I think it will be important also to share ideas and perspectives in order not to look only at the past, but to consider memory as the possible flows for changing and envision a different way of the future to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muriel.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thank you very much, Muriel. As we are already reaching the end of this first inspiring memory session, I would like to thank all of the attendants today here. The recording of this session will be available on our YouTube channel. And we are also always available to all of you for using the usual channels for any question, any help you need while organizing your activities of the European Days of Jewish Culture. I would like to thank you to Victor Sorensen, our director, and also to the present members of the APJ board here, Madame Claude Bloch, honorary president, and Pelina Zilberman, member of the board. And especially very much thank you to Luca Baraldi for all of your help, your inspiration, and your always challenging ideas. Thanks to you all, and have a nice evening.